Part 1. The Storm Begins. It started with spaghetti. Not the fancy kind either, just plain old spaghetti with jarred marinara and a sprinkle of shaky Parmesan cheese. A Tuesday night tradition in our house, born out of laziness rather than any shared culinary passion. She was unusually quiet that evening, swirling the same forkful of pasta for so long I joked it might fossilize before she ate it. She didn't laugh. Instead, she looked up at me with this expression I couldn't place. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice soft but weighted, like it had been rehearsed 100 times. Here's the thing about marriage: when your spouse starts a sentence with, "I need to talk to you," it's never about something good. It's not. "I need to talk to you about how I love your weird collection of novelty socks." No, it's always bad. "Okay," I replied, bracing myself. Maybe she accidentally crashed the car. Maybe she bought something expensive and was trying to soften the blow. "It's about us," she said, and suddenly I wished it was about the car. I stared at her, waiting for her to elaborate, but she just fidgeted with her fork. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Did I do something?" Her eyes darted away, fixing on the floral pattern of the placemats we got for our wedding. "I've been seeing someone." For a moment, my brain refused to process the words. Seeing someone? Like a therapist? A psychic? A personal trainer? Surely not. "What do you mean, seeing someone?" I asked, my voice catching like an engine that wouldn't turn over. She sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of whatever storm she was about to unleash. "His name is Frank. He's a colleague." And just like that, my world tilted. Frank. Frank from her office. Frank, who brought bagels to staff meetings and got excited about the annual company picnic. Frank, who once called me Buddy at the holiday party while holding a cup of eggnog like it was the Holy Grail. "Frank," I repeated, the name tasting bitter on my tongue. "Frank from accounting?" She nodded, her face a portrait of guilt and resolve. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." There it was, the wrecking ball that smashed into our little spaghetti dinner. At first I laughed. Not out of amusement, but because my brain couldn't figure out how else to react. Frank? Frank was the human equivalent of white bread. He wore khakis with the same enthusiasm most people reserve for winning the lottery. What could she possibly see in him? But the laughter died quickly, replaced by a sharp, burning ache in my chest. "You're leaving me for Frank?" I asked, the words sounding absurd even as I said them. She didn't answer, at least not verbally. She just gestured to the suitcase sitting by the front door, half hidden behind the coat rack. It was already packed. That was when I realized this wasn't a conversation, it was an announcement. Decisions had been made, plans set in motion. She wasn't asking for my input, she was informing me of her exit strategy. "I don't." My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. "I don't understand. When? How long has this been going on?" She looked down at her plate, still untouched. "A few months." A few months. While I was planning our anniversary weekend, she was, what? Grabbing coffee with Frank? Laughing at his accounting jokes? I wanted to scream, to shout, to throw the damn spaghetti against the wall. Instead, I just sat there, numb and silent, as she got up from the table and began gathering her things. The last thing she said before walking out the door was, "I'm sorry." Sorry. As if that single word could bandage the gaping wound she just left in my life. And then, she was gone. Part 2, Frank the Savior. The thing about Frank is, he's not the type of guy you'd imagine stealing someone's wife. He's not suave or charming, not the kind of man who turns heads when he enters a room. Frank is, well, Frank? The guy who organizes the office Secret Santa like it's his personal Olympics. The guy who laughs too hard at his own puns. But according to my wife, sorry, ex-wife in progress, Frank was so much more than that. "He listens to me," she said in one of our few strained post-spaghetti conversations. "He makes me feel heard." "Listens to what?" I snapped, Because I'd heard every word she'd ever said about her endless podcast recommendations and our neighbor's annoying dog. But apparently, Frank's ears were made of pure gold. I started piecing it together after she left. Those late nights she said she was working? Frank. Those team bonding lunches? Frank. The sudden interest in office politics? You guessed it, Frank. Still, I couldn't figure out the why. What did she see in him? Was it his predictability? His unflinching normalcy? Was I too messy, too unpredictable, too me? I started obsessing over every detail I knew about Frank. His favorite lunch was a turkey sandwich with extra mayo. He had a Honda Civic so spotless you could eat off the dashboard. He used phrases like, circle back, unironically. Was that what my wife wanted? A guy who folded his socks with military precision and had strong opinions about LinkedIn etiquette. But then, a darker thought crept in. Maybe it wasn't about Frank at all. Maybe it was about me. Maybe I hadn't been enough. So I did what any self-respecting man in my position would do. I Googled, how to win your wife back. Spoiler alert, the internet is full of terrible advice. One article suggested taking her on a surprise vacation, which seemed less romantic and more like kidnapping given the circumstances. Another suggested buying her an expensive gift, which might have worked if Frank hadn't already swooped in with his attentive listening skills. Instead, I tried to distract myself. I went back to the gym, hoping a few miles on the treadmill would make me forget the image of Frank wearing his stupid Bluetooth headset while he listened to my wife. It didn't work. I even tried therapy, which was going fine until I accidentally referred to my ex-wife as Frank's project. My therapist's disapproving look said it all. And yet, no matter what I did, I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling that I'd been replaced by someone so painfully ordinary. Was I that easy to trade in? Did my quirks, my flaws, and my attempts at humor really pale in comparison to Frank's meticulous spreadsheets and predictable small talk? I thought about calling her, begging her to come back, promising to change. But every time I picked up the phone, I imagined her sitting with Frank, sharing a quiet laugh at my expense. So instead, I stayed silent, stewing in my own inadequacy while Frank played savior. And the worst part? I had no idea if he even knew the pedestal she'd put him on, or if he'd crumble under the weight of it. Part 3: The Adjustment Period. When she left, the silence in the house was the first thing that hit me. It was unbearable. No TV humming in the background, no off-key singing from the kitchen while she cooked. Even the cat, her self-declared favorite, sulked in her empty chair, glaring at me like I was somehow to blame for all of this. At first, I tried to carry on like nothing had changed. I woke up, went to work, came home, and ate in front of the TV. The same routine minus her. But everything reminded me of her. The crime drama still saved in our Netflix queue. The pile of throw pillows on the couch she insisted we needed. For the vibe. The scent of her favorite lavender hand lotion lingering in the bathroom. I couldn't escape her, even in my dreams. She'd show up, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear, always just out of reach. And then I'd wake up to the cold reality of my empty bed. I threw myself into distractions. Woodworking, for one. I'd always been terrible at it, but now I was determined to master the art of turning scrap wood into something resembling furniture. It kept my hands busy, even if the dining table I'd built wobbled like a baby deer. I also started running again, something I hadn't done since college. At first, it was to blow off steam, but soon it became my escape. I'd hit the pavement every night, headphones blasting 90s pop songs I wouldn't admit to liking. For an hour, I could pretend I wasn't the guy whose wife left him for Frank from accounting. Still, there were moments I couldn't avoid the reality of it. Like when I ran into our mutual friends at the grocery store, and their awkward smiles said more than their forced small talk ever could. Or when the neighbor asked, "Hey, where's your wife? Haven't seen her in a while." And I had to fake a smile and mumble something about time apart. I thought about calling her, but what would I even say? "Hey, I miss you. Come back, and I promise I'll try to be more like Frank?" No thanks. One night, I sat down to eat a frozen pizza and realized I hadn't actually cooked a meal since she left. Not that I'd ever been a great cook, but it was different now. Cooking felt pointless when there was no one to critique the salt level or steal bites off my plate. The worst part was how much I missed the little things. Her laugh when she accidentally spilled something. The way she'd curl up on the couch with a blanket and a book, her nose scrunched in concentration. Even the random arguments over what to watch on TV felt like a kind of closeness I hadn't appreciated until it was gone. Life was quieter without her, but it wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like the house itself had given up trying to feel alive. Part 4. Frank at the grocery store. 2 months after she left, I ran into them. It was a Saturday morning, the kind where you're still half asleep, aimlessly wandering the grocery store aisles in sweatpants. I wasn't expecting to see anyone, least of all them. I was in the cereal aisle, debating the existential crisis that is choosing between sugary nostalgia or heart-healthy responsibility. That's when I heard it, a laugh. Her laugh. I froze, my hand hovering over a box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. I didn't need to turn around to know it was her. That laugh had been my soundtrack for years, familiar enough to recognize even in the middle of a crowded store. When I finally turned, there they were. She was standing next to Frank, clutching a shopping basket. And let me tell you, Frank looked exactly as Frank as I remembered, pressed khakis, tucked in polo, and the kind of posture that screamed. I read the employee handbook for fun. They were debating cereal, of all things. She held up a box of some organic granola while Frank made a case for Frosted Flakes like they were on trial for treason. He was gesturing with such intensity, you'd think the fate of breakfast as we know it hung in the balance. I should have walked away, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, staring like some weirdo in the background of their domestic bliss. And then she saw me. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she smoothed it over like nothing had happened. She leaned into Frank, saying something that made him glance in my direction. His expression didn't change, no guilt, no smugness. Just bland neutrality, like I was another line on a spreadsheet he had to balance. I felt my stomach churn. I wasn't sure if it was anger or humiliation or both. Maybe it was the surrealness of seeing them together, like watching a sitcom crossover episode that didn't make sense. I considered walking up to them, making some snide comment about how Frank's new girlfriend sure loves Cinnamon Toast Crunch. But what would that accomplish, other than making me look like an unhinged ex-husband? So, I turned on my heel and headed for the frozen food section. I grabbed the first box of pizza rolls I saw, just to give my hands something to do. But as I walked to the checkout line, I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. What were they like together, I wondered. Did she laugh at his jokes the way she used to laugh at mine? Did Frank hold her hand in the grocery store, or was he the type to keep both hands on the cart, diligently steering through the aisles? I tried not to care, but the truth was seeing them hurt. It felt like she'd walked out of our story and straight into another, one where I'd been written out entirely. By the time I got home, my head was spinning. I sat on the couch with the box of pizza rolls, staring at the wall. The logical part of me knew this encounter didn't matter, that she'd made her choice. But the emotional part? It was stuck in that grocery aisle, watching her laugh with Frank over cereal. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel it fully, the hurt, the anger, the loss. And as much as it sucked, it was also a small step toward letting go. Because if she was moving on with Frank, maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to move on too. Have you ever had to let go of someone, not because you stopped loving them, but because they stopped choosing you? If so, how did you move forward? Part 5. The letter. A week after the grocery store debacle, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Not a bill or junk mail, but a real letter in an envelope addressed to me in her familiar handwriting. For a moment, I just stared at it, as if the envelope might explode. I hadn't heard from her since she left, aside from a quick, awkward text about forwarding her mail. Now, here was this letter, and I had no idea what it might say, or if I even wanted to know. Finally, I tore it open, the paper trembling in my hands. Dear, my name. I know I don't have the right to ask you to read this, but I hope you will anyway. There are things I need to say, things I should have said before I left. First, I'm sorry. I know that's a small word for such a big wound, but I don't know where else to start. I didn't leave because you weren't enough. I left because I felt lost and Frank felt like clarity in the chaos. I don't expect you to understand, and I don't think I fully understand myself. But with him, I felt like someone else, someone lighter, freer. I'm not saying it was right or fair, only that it's how I felt. That said, I miss things about us. I miss your laugh, your terrible jokes, and the way you always knew when I needed a hug, even when I didn't know myself. I miss Sunday mornings, drinking coffee and arguing about which documentary to watch. I don't know if I made the right choice. Frank, he's kind, but he's also different from what I imagined. Sometimes I wonder if I traded too much. But it's too late for regrets. I just wanted you to know that you mattered to me, more than I probably ever showed. I hope you find someone who sees you for everything you are and everything you'll become. Because you're worth it, even if I couldn't see it clearly at the time. All the best. Her name. I read the letter 3 times before I could set it down. It was like she'd reached into my chest, poked at the rawest parts of me, and then tried to stitch them up with her words. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to hate her for her half-apologies and vague regrets. But I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't hate her. If anything, I pitied her. She sounded as lost as I felt. Still, the letter didn't bring the closure she might have hoped for. Instead, it left me spinning, wondering if she was genuinely trying to make amends, or if she was just trying to unburden herself. I spent the rest of the night thinking about it, the letter sitting on the coffee table like a silent judge. Eventually, I folded it up, placed it in a drawer, and decided not to respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew a reply wouldn't change anything. Her letter felt like a parting gift, an acknowledgement of the good and the bad, wrapped in uncertainty. And as much as it hurt to read, it also gave me something unexpected, permission to let go. Part 6. Closure? In the weeks after the letter, I started piecing myself back together. It wasn't easy. Grief has a way of lingering like a bad song stuck in your head. Some mornings, I woke up feeling lighter, like the weight of it all was finally lifting. Other days, I'd spiral, replaying old conversations and wondering if I could have done something, anything, to keep her from walking out that door. But then came the day I saw Frank again. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was sitting at my usual coffee shop, nursing a cappuccino and pretending to read a book while actually people watching. And there he was, in line for coffee. Alone. I hadn't expected to see him without her, and for a brief moment, I debated ducking behind a potted plant to avoid the encounter entirely. But before I could decide, he spotted me. "Hey," Frank said, his face lighting up like we were old pals. He grabbed his coffee and plopped down in the chair across from me. I didn't say anything at first. I mean, what do you even say to the guy who stole your wife? "You look good," he said, sipping his latte. "Better, I mean. You know, considering." "Considering?" "Frank," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged. "Just grabbing a coffee. Thought I'd say hi. No hard feelings, right?" No hard feelings? Was this guy serious? He had the audacity to sip his coffee like he wasn't the human wrecking ball that smashed through my life. "Actually," I said, setting my cup down a little harder than I meant to, "there are a few hard feelings." Frank's face faltered, but only for a second. Then he did the thing I hate most about him. He smiled. That mild, condescending smile that made you feel like you were the one overreacting. "She told me you'd feel that way," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But look, man, I didn't take her from you. She came to me. You know how it goes, sometimes people just grow apart." I stared at him, stunned by his arrogance. And then, something clicked. For the first time since all this started, I didn't feel anger or jealousy. I felt pity. Because as smug as Frank seemed, he didn't realize the truth yet. Being the rebound guy isn't a prize, it's a placeholder. So I just smiled, stood up, and said, "Good luck, Frank." As I walked away, I realized I didn't need an argument or some grand gesture of closure. Frank could have her. I was done trying to hold on to someone who wasn't holding on to me. That night, I went home, pulled her letter out of the drawer, and read it one last time. Then I burned it. Not out of spite, but as a symbol that I was ready to move forward. I've started carving out a new life for myself. It's messy and imperfect, but it's mine. I don't know if she and Frank will last, and frankly, I don't care. For the first time in a long time, I'm focused on me, what I want, what I need.